Man like Mark Sullivan, worry yourself. Stay tuned for the thrilling episode. Woo!
A positive mental attitude can clear away all obstacles which stand between you and your major purpose in life.
This is the Snowboard Project featuring Mark Sullivan and the Beav. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project.
Welcome to the Snowboard Project. I'm Mark Sullivan.
I'm the Beav.
And this is the new snowboarding podcast that we're putting together.
It's pretty exciting. This is show number 1. Kind of talk to me. What is the Snowboard Project?
Well, the Snowboard Project is a little bit of a different take than traditional media to snowboarding. And the goal is basically self-improvement through snowboarding. Like, the snowboard has been my vehicle to travel the world, to meet driven, fascinating people, and to have all these crazy life experiences. And it wasn't just through the tricks that I was doing. It was through the people I met and the places I got to visit. And so, to me, some of the more fascinating stories in the sport aren't with the pro riders, but with the people who've dedicated a piece of themselves to the sport of snowboarding. So those could be, anything from, pro riders, but also people who were sales reps, people who were graphic designers, people who were there for the beginning of the sport, right? And were part of the genesis of snowboarding. And so those are the stories that I find interesting and I want to cover with the Snowboard Project.
Now, there are a few other podcasts out there. There are some action sports podcasts. There are some snowboard podcasts. What's really going to set this apart? What's really going to be the difference?
Well, hopefully, I can drill down into some real usable advice that these people have, some of the lessons they've learned, some of the mistakes they've made and how they've learned from them. And really, maybe take a piece of that to your own life beyond snowboarding.
So who are some of the people that we're going to be kind of like covering through this season of the Snowboard Project?
Well, there's all sorts of people. I mean, I've talked to some of the legends like Mike Chantry and Bob Klein, guys like Dave Cione, guys like Mike Bassich and Ricky Bauer, the coach of the halfpipe team for the United States. So all sorts of different people. Pat Bridges, Aaron Draplin. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Let me ask you this personally. What do you hope to kind of extract from these interviews that can not only be shared with your audience, but do you feel like you might actually be gaining some great advice just for your own self that you didn't actually know about beforehand?
Yeah, the funny thing is I kind of walked into this thinking that I knew a lot about snowboarding. I was like, I got this figured out. I'll just do a podcast. I've been an announcer and been involved with media. That's a natural fit. And what I realized is that, like, with every single interview, I've actually learned something about the snowboarding by just listening to different people's perspectives and how they approach the sport differently than I did. And so with every interview, I actually learned something about the sport, and it has driven me to want to do more and more and more podcast. So we're going to start out with 3 shows a week. We're going to go to 5 shows a week in about a month. Right now I'm actually just building shows on the side, doing interviews with different fascinating people. But we'll start out with 3 shows a week and then go to 5 shows a week because snowboarding is such a rich sport. There's so many different characters and people involved with it. I think that it deserves to have a different kind of in-depth media than just like, here are the pros, here are the tricks, here are the edits, right? And so this is supposed to give you something more to listen to.
Yeah, kind of talk to me just a little bit about that. Why do you feel like there's a need for this kind of media in our current state of snowboarding?
Well, the media has kind of taken a shift recently with social media kind of becoming a dominant form of as a media outlet. And so, when you look at what you get from the media, now it's been boiled down to a single image or a single video clip, and you really don't get those in-depth interviews. You don't get those in-depth stories, and you don't really, have access to kind of the stories behind the stories. And so that's really what I'd like to share.
How do you feel like this is really going to just like differentiate from kind of our current snowboard media, I guess?
Well, I'd say this is going to be completely different. Number one, it's audio. So there's not, I mean, normally like snowboarding is, very visual in terms of the media portrayal of the sport. And so that's videos, that's pages in magazines traditionally, maybe not as much anymore. But, this is definitely not a visual medium. So I'll try to tell stories that hopefully paint a picture in your head. And the interesting thing is that like when you're listening to this, you have to actually use your mind to create kind of the image of your head of what was happening. And so I think that's kind of a little bit different than actually being kind of force-fed visuals the entire time.
Now, there's kind of been this, like, I guess, classic structure on how, like, the media or magazines or movies would make money. Kind of just tell me just a little bit about how you plan to fund something like this,
Okay, well, this is pretty interesting. And for the first time ever in my career, this is going to be an advertising-free model. Maybe I'll accept advertising from a beer company. I'm not sure. But that's a different story, right? That's totally different. But no endemic advertisers. There's going to be no Burton ads. There's going to be no Never Summer ads. This is not to play favorites. This is actually just to tell the real truth behind snowboarding as I see it, right? And this is my own, impression of the sport based on my 30 years experience with it. So anyhow, I'm using what's called Patreon. And you go to patreon.com/the Snowboard Project and you can donate money to this podcast. And so, you can donate $2. You can donate up to $100 to become an associate producer and have a monthly consultation with us. And we'll tell you about, if you want to win a gold medal or where to go in January. We'll talk to you every month, about snowboarding over the phone. So anyhow, there's different levels. Go to patreon.com/the Snowboard Project and donate, because this is actually the first time ever in my experience that this is a media outlet that is not reliant on advertising and not beholden to those advertisers to tell those stories. So we can just tell the real truth.
Don't forget to support advertising-free snowboarding media at patreon.com. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project.
Let's just rewind just a little bit. Let's go into kind of the history of you and media and why you feel like you're someone that has the, I guess, ability to tell these stories. Just tell me just a little about your history of snowboarding.
Oh, okay. Well, I started snowboarding when I was 14 years old, and I was like one of the fairly early adopters, let's say. I was on a ski vacation in Jackson Hole, first time out west, and I broke my skis, and I was like, do I telemark or do I snowboard? And I walked into a shop, and there was Chris Pappas, and he rented me a board and got me set up and gave me a lesson. And so literally from that very first day, though, I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. And I never looked back, actually, 32, 33 years later. It's like I've never actually looked back. And so, roll that forward. I was a sponsored athlete for a number of years and trying to follow this dream of professional snowboarding. And then I got my hands on a Transworld Media kit when I was like 18, living in Breckenridge. And it was like, $3,000 or $4,000 an ad right then. And I added up all the ads in a copy of Transworld. And I was like, they're bringing in like $500,000 an issue. Whoa. Yeah, and that was just the advertising. They had subscribers and newsstand sales. I mean, they were bringing in a lot of money. I was like, you know what? If they can bring in this kind of money, and yet the story of what we were doing, we were like jibbing and doing, like, we had a little bit different style than was portrayed in the magazine. So I was like, that this voice maybe has a place in snowboarding media. And so I started a zine based on working. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 11 dudes and 2 pit bulls. Paid about $75 a month in rent for a bed. Basically, it was like a hostel. And so, like, I gathered together my roommates. Big Brother had just come out. Big Brother Magazine issue 1 had just come out, and issue 2 maybe had just come out. I think we were looking at issue 1 though, and that was kind of the inspiration, was to do something like Big Brother, and so my roommates were all kind of sponsored athletes, and we kind of gathered around. It was like myself and TJ Lise and Chad Schnacky and a guy named, I believe, Joe W. was involved as well, and Pat Abramson. And so those were the guys kind of contributing to it. We also had, I also lived with like Rowan Rogers and Dale Rayberg and that whole crew, Nate Cole. And those guys were on the road, though. They were already kind of famous, and we were knocking on their door, basically trying to become pro riders. And so we decided, well, I pretty much led the charge, but like the idea was like, let's tell the story of what's going on here with these kids in Breckenridge that is a little bit less glossy and than the traditional media that was out there.
Sure. Now, so that was the start of Player Magazine then?
Player Magazine.
Player Magazine. Tell me, okay, so you took that idea and that model and you went out to like what, SIA?
Yeah, so we made like 1,000 copies and I sold ads. I was like the ad sales guy as well as kind of one of the editors, one of the 4 editors. And we came up about, I don't know, $400 short. So we all had to kick in $100 to get the thing printed. And we brought to SIA 1,000 copies of the magazine. And, I had on the cover of the first mag was Stephanie Seymour. She'd just been in Playboy. She was like the hottest girl in the world, totally buck naked on the cover, just naked girl on the cover of the magazine. And so literally I distributed like 1,000 magazines in 4 hours, and everywhere you looked at this trade show, there were people reading the magazine, and it was like a hit. And people were like, man, you got to do more of this. And so that kind of like gave me my start in the media and gave me this direction. And so I made a second copy of Player. And like the thing is, though, I didn't know anything about graphic design. I didn't know anything about printing. All I knew about was snowboarding and my raw desire to kind of like tell our story from our perspective, which was different than what was happening in the traditional media. And so that was kind of the birth of my career in media. And that was, I think, 92, maybe something like that. 92, 93. Yeah.
How was it walking into SIA? I mean, did you have like, were you scared about the outcome, or were you like, hey, this is what I'm doing and I'm going to kick ass? And
I don't know if we really had, I think it was probably more like, oh, we're going to sneak in, right? So it was more like worried about like how we were going to get into SIA
like
with these magazines.
Like a true snowboarder.
Yeah, and like, I mean, we were pretty raw. I had sponsors at the time still, and so, we all figured out our individual paths in, and then brought boxes of magazines or backpacks of magazines and just started handing them out. And from the first reaction, I mean, everyone just loved the cover. What's not to love about a naked girl on the cover of a magazine when you're 18, right? And so yeah, immediately, like, people were like, the immediate reaction from the first person who saw it was like, wow, that's something different, and that was kind of an unintentional success, I guess. I mean, the print quality, the typos, everything. I look back on that, and it was so bad from like from a professional perspective, but yet it had this raw message that was different than what was out there.
Real cool. So you took that experience and you then, went back to college. You decided, hey, this is going to be my life path. Talk to me just about college. Talk to me about the start of East Infection and what that was all about. Okay, well, I made a second issue of Player, and I decided to go all color because it was always about improvement. Like, just like snowboarding, you want to get better and better and better. So I was like, okay, how do you go from a black and white scene? You make a color one. So I made a color one, printed on an offset press. And I remember, printing, and the idea distribution model was send them to shops for free, get them out there, printed 10,000 of them. And I go to pick up the magazine, and the guy who's the rep from the printer is like, here's the magazine, man. It looks like you guys are having a wild time up there in the mountains. And I was like, yeah, we are, totally. And he's like, so how'd you do your color correction anyway? And I was like, what's color correction, right? Because everything, like every photo was just like super dark. It was like literally flatbed scanned of prints, basically, and photos that we took of screen grabs. We had a 4-head VCR, and we'd like pause the VCR and take photos of the TV screen to do video grabs. We were pretty ghetto. We just hacked it, right? We just figured out how to make it happen. But that's when I realized that, like, okay, there's more to this than just like making it happen. It's not just about the idea, it's about doing it as professionally as you can. And so then I was like, okay, well, I should probably go back to college and learn
more about this, and I had already done a couple of semesters in the fall and the summer at UVM, and so I went back and switched my major from environmental studies to marketing, business, and I figured I'd learn the business side of magazines, and I could find the people who knew about color correction and about graphic design and all that while I was like graphic designing and doing all these jobs. I did basically every job at some point for the magazine. And so then I had a friend, Pat Bridges, who I grew up competing with. And so I talked to him about, hey, I'm back here and going to college full time. I'm going to finish this thing out. And I'm going to start a zine here to represent East Coast snowboarding. And so he came up with the name East Infection, which captured the infectious spirit of snowboarding on the East Coast at the time.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Oh man. And so, but I liked it because it was kind of like, a little bit outsider.
Sure.
And really in snowboarder and trans world at that time, there was no coverage of the East Coast. You might get like 4 or 5 photos a year of like someone on the East Coast snowboarding. And yet here's this vibrant scene going on every weekend, every day that we could go to the mountain, we were doing it. And so that's kind of the birth of East Infection. And then, so, my strategy with the first issue, the first one was 24 pages. And it was like, I wanted to put as many people in that first issue as I could. So I put like 130 different riders in that first issue. Yeah, the photos were small, right? But then it was like, hey, you're in the magazine. Hey, you're in the magazine. Hey, you're in the magazine. So all the sponsored riders kind of got a little piece of that. And so that kind of, snowballed for 3 years, got better and better and better for 3 years. And I learned a world about publishing and about how magazines were made, and also just from, a DIY perspective as well. There was no one kind of helping us do it. We got to the point where we had a house that we rented for the staff, and so that was like Pat Bridges and Evan Rose, who's like now the creative director at Burton. This guy Chaka, Michael Gardzina, he'll be one of my interviews as well. And so all these guys, though, ended up sticking with snowboarding or skateboarding, and like George Kovala was my first photo editor. He's at 686 today, and Herb George was my ad sales guy, and he's at Osiris Shoes. He like runs Osiris, and so anyhow, all these people had just had this genuine passion. It was our way of like going to college and learning, but also doing what we loved, and really that's what this podcast is about, is like taking something you love and then pouring something of yourself into it. And so that's what these stories really in this podcast are about, are people who can dedicate themselves and their passion, their time and their work towards their passion, and so they get a little bit maybe more satisfaction out of doing something you love.
Sure. So you were able to snowball this thing to the point where you guys had enough capital to go out and rent a space. Where you actually did this help put you through college?
No, I mean, basically I paid the rent. We had a party every Tuesday night, like a keg party every Tuesday night. And there's some wild stories from those parties, but...
So wait, the keg party funded like the magazine?
No, the keg party just funded itself, I think. But we just wanted to have a good time. We were snowboarders. We were still competing. We were all kind of wanting to be sponsored riders at the time, but also had this like drive to do something more with snowboarding than just ride. And so it was just quite an adventure, to have a house and all your friends and just to be able to dedicate yourself in your spare time. And that's kind of when I started just working these crazy hours, because I was going to school and getting A's and B's in school full time, and also making a magazine full time. And I was doing the sales, I was doing the graphic design, I was writing a little bit of the stories. Bridges was really the writer. It came naturally to him. It did not come naturally to me at that time. And so really, it was just this like trial by fire. So we would make mistakes. We would make big mistakes, and but then we learned from those mistakes and tried not to make them again.
Right.
And so then, after I graduated college, it was kind of like, okay, I think I have done the East Coast justice as far as like I've made 3 years of magazines. It's time to go out west, because I knew that like my experiences in Colorado, that it's like softer snow, bigger mountains. For a variety of reasons, I wanted to go out west. And so I actually had like job offers from both Snowboarder and from Transworld. And Snowboarder was like, do you want to be in sales or do you want to be in editorial? And I was like, well, what's the difference? And they were like, well, the salespeople make a lot more money and the editorial people get to travel everywhere. And I was like, I'll be an editor, right? And so that's how I kind of landed in California, you know. And as associate editor, you know, packed up the Nissan pickup truck and dragged the U-Haul trailer across the country and showed up there just totally green.
Now, to me, this kind of sounds a little crazy. Yeah, like you're like 24, 25, 26, right around there.
Yep.
Kind of just coming out of school. How was it that Snowboarder and Transworld and all these magazines out west had this kind of beat on you, basically, and said, like, we want Mark Sullivan to come out here. We want him to come.
Well, I mean, the magazine that we were making, we were going to the trade show. Bridges and I would go to the trade show and try to sell ads to potential advertisers. And, you know, we would print, you know, 10,000 copies of each issue. So they were getting out there. People saw them. We sent them to snowboard shops. We had a handful of subscribers, you know, and so it was kind of a known quantity. And I think that maybe they recognized just the fact, the desire to do this, you know, to be a part of this industry and to you know, just be a part of snowboarding at a bigger level. And so, you know, I remember it was kind of heartbreaking that, like, when I got out there, like on my first day of work, my boss was like, hey man, you can't be sponsored anymore. That's a conflict of interest. So I had to drop all my sponsors. And I was like, oh man, this is going to help my sponsorship, you know, opportunities. And now I can become a pro somehow. Like, I still had that dream kind of in the back of my head that I'd be a pro, but it made me like really kind of come to that decision. Like, no, you're going to be working in the industry and not a rider. Right. And not that I ever gave up on riding or progression in riding, but like that was going to be my path, basically, from then on.
Talk to me about day one. You walked in there. Were you scared, or did you walk in there with all the confidence in the world that you were just going to change this magazine?
I was scared shitless. I gotta say. I mean, this is like, so. I mean, let me paint a picture for you. This is in like an old airplane hangar, divided up into cubicles with a few offices. It's the home of Surfer Magazine, which is like just a legendary publication that started in like 1964 and basically defined surf culture. And there were like all these old surfboards around. It really was like a, you know, like where the culture of surfing lived. Well, snowboarding was just like a stepchild basically to Surfer Magazine. Everything was a stepchild to Surfer Magazine. And so, you know, I got in there, and, you know, the guys from Surfer Magazine were really confident, and I was a guy who just literally landed in California the week before, or a couple days before, and was just out of my element in every sense of the word. But I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to try to give it a college try. You know, I'm going to give it my all. And so that's what I did. And I was an editor, and I never found writing easy, but I was like, I'll do it. So I was like this guy who would like write stories like 4 and 5 times from scratch. I'd write it once and then like rip it up and like, you know, write it from scratch again, and just do that over and over and over again until the point came 7 or 8 years later when I could actually just pick up a pen or typewriter or whatever, keyboard, and write. You know, but it was hard fought really to do that. But I knew that my voice was legitimate, as far as like I was a snowboarder, and I was one of the only people who defined them. I was the only person who defined themselves as a snowboarder. Like at that time, like that's who I was. I was a snowboarder, just like the surfers at Surfer Magazine. They were surfers, and then they got into media as a byproduct of that. Gotcha. So
Snowboarder was kind of being run by people that snowboarded, but not necessarily snowboarders.
Yeah, I mean, they were competent. They snowboarded for sure, but it's like they didn't grow up like defining themselves as snowboarders. And so they, you know, they're good job, great people, but it's like they didn't live and die by snowboarding. To me, snowboarding mattered more than magazines, right? For them, it was like, hey, I got this great job being, you know, working at a magazine or whatever. And so, you know, and they were great people. They did a good job. They tried to tell these authentic stories of the pros and the people who were out there doing it. But it was like I came from this other place, which was just like, I define myself by this, and if I do a good job, it's a byproduct of that determination.
Now, you came in as an associate editor, basically. How'd you kind of work your way up, and how did you get to the point where you were like, you know, I guess calling the shots, steering the ship? Well,
it was funny. You know, it was almost a really short-term gig. I started at $24,000 a year, which was, it actually like, so my
$24,000 in like what, 93, 94?
No, this is like 97, I want to say.
97.
97, I started as Snowboarder. And so, you know, my 6-month review came, and I was like, man, this is like dream job. I get to work with people I like. I get to just focus on snowboarding, and I have kind of carte blanche as far as like just going and, you know, being a snowboarder. I can go to all these different cool places I've always dreamed about going. And so I go in for my 6-month review, and my boss is like, okay, you've done an awesome job. You know, we want to promote you to senior editor. And I'm like patting myself on the back like I've made it, right? And so then it comes time to negotiate the salary. I think he offered me $26,000, like a $2,000 a year raise to take that new job title. And I was like, look, here's all my bills. I actually added them up ahead of time, and actually it cost me $27,500 to live here in California. It's just the rent isn't cheap, you know, whatever. And he was like, you know, hey, look, you can take this or leave it. There's 100 people waiting for this position. Wow. And so I literally, I took a couple minutes, you know, to think about it. But finally I was like, okay, I'll do it. I'll stay on, you know, and basically I had to call up my parents to ask them to pay for my car insurance, you know, because I couldn't afford car insurance.
Sure.
You know, and so, you know, and that kind of gave me that mettle to like, just be like, okay, I'm here for snowboarding. This isn't about the money. This isn't about, you know, rising to the top or whatever. This is about the sport of snowboarding and doing a good job for it. And so then the .com boom came, and so there all of a sudden was like, you know, a land rush for people who knew media. Right. And so I was one of those people. So we're like a lot of people. And so actually the bosses at Snowboarder ended up going and starting their own kind of new media company that was internet and I don't know, whatever. They had like a bunch of different facets to it. And they tried to get me, you know, to go with them. And I was like, well, wait a minute. If I'm the last man standing here, that makes me, by default, I hope anyway, the boss. And so sure enough, I stayed, everyone else left, and I had this like negotiation, which was like based on my prior experience with negotiation. I wasn't going to get run over.
Sure.
And I became the editor-in-chief of Snowboarder Magazine at that point, and really had to completely staff the whole magazine. We didn't have an art director, we didn't have a photo editor, we didn't have a managing editor, we didn't have any of the people that we had to rely on. So really it was like I got to redefine the magazine at that point. And that's when Bridges kind of came out. I tapped him on the shoulders, you know, and he came out as a senior editor, and then I hired Jeff Baker, and then took a while, but I found Aaron Draplin because I really had this passion for design and being authentic to design, and that ended up working out. In fact, funny story about that is I actually put my job on the line to hire Aaron Draplin, right? It's like for his first job, he was in college, and he was just about to graduate from MCAD in Minneapolis, which is like a great design school. But, you know, the head sales guy, publisher guy was just like, you know, there's just no way that a guy from college can handle. And so anyhow, I'm just like, look, man, you can fire me if this doesn't work. Because he was also driven like I was. I saw like a piece of me in him, which was like, he was driven to snowboarding. He was driven to great design. And that's something I didn't have, the great design or the background in design, but I knew that he wouldn't let us down, you know, because he loves snowboarding enough where it's like he didn't owe it for the job, he owed it for the sport. And man, that first year, it kind of, I would say, kind of redefined magazines as far as like the look, the feel, the content, all of it. Because we just had, all of a sudden, we went from having people who snowboarded to being exclusively people who are snowboarders running the magazine. And I think that was like the first time that really had happened. As far as I know, I could be wrong, but as far as I know, that was really like the first time that had happened. And like, within a couple months, like, we were being copied by every other publication, most notably Transworld. But it's like we made waves, you know, and we had a good time doing it too. By the way, we got to snowboard all over the place.
Yeah, really quickly, just rewind a little bit. Draplin, he is just talk a little bit about who he is and what his influence has been. He's kind of one of those guys behind the scenes that we wouldn't normally hear about, but his influence has been pretty huge, I guess, in snowboarding.
I would say because, you know, snowboarding media and snowboarding in general is such a visual thing, that being a great graphic designer, I mean, Draplin could like literally render drawings. Like, he could sit here and draw a picture of you that looked more or less photorealistic when he was like in the 4th grade. Right. So he was a prodigy of art, I would say. And then he went, kind of chased his snowboard dreams in Bend, Oregon. And then he was like, okay, similar to me, he's like, I got to get an education, get some like backbone behind all this passion that I have. And so he went to one of the top design schools in the country, and so anyhow, he became the art director of Snowboarder, and on the side, he would do stuff like design boards for Burton or other stuff.
Right.
Oh yeah, he designed the Burton custom, and I remember, we were really jealous because he got paid $13,000 to do a single graphic.
Right.
Like, well, that's unfair, We were,
that's half my salary.
Yeah, I know. And so, but anyhow, he deserved it, And
Right.
the thing is like he had a real passion and a background in design that would allow him to be authentic with his artwork. And so he went on to do graphics for basically most of the great companies of snowboarding, and he was actually the art director for Snowboard Magazine when I started that. And then he's gone on to like these great things. He does speaking engagements all over the world now, like where he talks about design. He's done work for Apple, for Microsoft, for Ford, for Nike. I mean, he's really like at the absolute top of the game right now.
You were able to hire all your friends, hire the people that you wanted to hire all the people that you wanted to hire, and then you have this crew of people just like ready to kick ass for you. Talking about some of those days where you guys were kind of on top of the world and on top of, I guess, the media world.
Well, the thing is, it's like we never saw ourselves on top of the world. And really, it was just like a hard-fought battle. We all had so much passion for snowboarding. It was about the ideas. And so we would get into like big arguments about like what make a good cover, and we tried to take the frame of like, okay, this is what works on the newsstand or whatever, but then we would have these arguments that would last into the night, basically about what would make good content, who's a good interview, and all these different kind of aspects of snowboarding. And we put in really long hours. We didn't really actually have lives outside of showing up at that office, and none of us really wanted to. I mean, we were in SoCal, we were snowboarders by definition, which is like snowboarders at the beach, right? And we all tried to learn to surf, I would say, but
right.
with just so results, and and so basically we poured all of our effort and energy into making that magazine.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Rewind a little bit. Give me like a great story. One time with all those guys, you guys were, yeah. Give me some meat.
Okay. Something to think about. Let's see. Maybe the buyer's guide. That was an interesting one. So we had I basically talked our bosses into being able to go to Whistler for the season. We got Whistler to donate a house to us because I was like, we got to go to the mountains, right? In the wintertime, you're not publishing magazines. You finish in like December, and then that issue you finish in December comes out in like February, March at the end of the season. So I was like, so we had like the whole winter to develop content. So instead of traveling out of SoCal, we went to Whistler, and our whole crew, our whole staff went to Whistler.
Sounds like heaven.
It was heaven,
Yeah,
actually.
I bet.
And so we had this house. We had a bunch of pros staying there. Instead of telling you the buyer's guide story, I'll tell you my first snowmobile story.
Yeah, tell me the first snowmobile story.
This is actually a much more interesting story, maybe. So anyhow, I also talked Yamaha into giving us some sleds to demo for the season, and like that was kind of like the beginning of like the snowboarding scene. And so I was like, yeah, Yamaha will do like a feature in our British Columbia issue that we're going to do next year, and we'll do a feature on snowboarding, prominently featuring Yamaha snowmobiles. And so they ended up giving us like the first two Yamaha Mountain Max 6 and 700s in the country of Canada. And so we go and pick them up, and Draplin's up there, and I'm up there, and Hostenik is staying. Justin Hostenik is staying with us, and so we're going to go out on our inaugural mission. Hostenik's got his own RMK 700 with a 136 track that was like state of the art back then. Sure. And so we go out to I forgot the name of the zone, but anyhow, we have to go up this thing called the S-Chute. We ride out through this trail through the woods, and Draplin's no problem. He's from the Midwest. He's been on sleds, and me, I'm from Vermont. Right. I've been on sleds like around fields and stuff. We get to the bottom of this thing called the S-Chute.
A little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, literally, it's like a 1,000 vertical foot or 700 foot vertical foot run, and then there's a dog like a turn in the middle of it. And Hassan kind of looks at me. He's like, "You've ridden sleds before, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, totally." And like in my mind, I'm like, "Yeah, I've ridden sleds in Vermont around fields or whatever. Yeah, I've ridden snowmobiles, right? Go, stop, yeah." So he just takes off, and I take off behind him, maybe like 100 yards back, just to kind of gauge the speed. And basically, he's just wide open pinned straight up this thing, right? And literally, I make it to the top my first try, which is like probably miraculous in and of itself.
Right.
But then we get to the top, and it's like, and we turn around, it's like, where's Draplin? Oh, he didn't make it. So Hassan's like, go get him. And I was like, okay. And so I really don't know what I'm doing. And so I basically, I go to drop in back down the S chute the way I came up, and the thing like rolls away. So you're just looking at the valley floor. You can't really see the S chute till you're actually in it. And so right when I see the slope, there's Draplin capsized in the middle of the run. And so I end up just basically grabbing a fistful of brake. The sled goes sideways. I get pitched one way, it goes the other, and it just ragdolls. Bang, 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 like 700, 800 vertical feet, end over, ass over, tea kettle, whatever. I mean, just all the way down, just pieces of plastic flying everywhere.
And this is a brand new, like 6 miles on the sled.
Oh, yeah. So by the time I got down to the speedometer, it was broken. Like I picked up the speedometer. I was picking up pieces of plastic. Didn't want to litter. I had this environmental studies background, So I'm picking up all the pieces of plastic, windshield hood all along the way down. And, I pick up the speedometer or whatever and, locked on the speedometer 15 kilometers. So it had 15 kilometers on it before I totaled it. And
how was it breaking the news to Yamaha about that one?
We ended up paying for the sleds. We had an insurance policy.
Okay,
We bought them.
good.
We actually ended up using them. We scrapped them together. I think Dan Hudson is like an artist who's going to be on the podcast, but he actually got it to work or whatever. And
No
those
way.
Yamahas are bulletproof. I'll give them that. Right? They
right.
were like bulletproof because after this ass over tea kettle ride, just breaking off pieces of plastic in every direction, it still worked. So. Interesting though, that was my first snowmobile adventure, and so that's part of everything. It's like, okay, learn from your mistakes, don't
Sure.
do that again.
Sure.
And so I never threw a sled down a hill like that ever again, but I also kind of have never really lived that down, but I'll own it too. It's like, what, it's like you learn from your mistakes, and
Right.
so hopefully I won't be doing that to now a $15,000 sled that I actually have to pay for.
Right.
So that was, I think, 2000 or 2001 we did that. So, yeah.
Now, some of the things you were at Snowboarder, those years, there were some pretty fun things that kind of happened between super parks, and talk to me just about kind of some of those ideas, some of those kind of innovative things that you guys ended up coming up with just as, your crew, or did you come up with those or?
I came up with a bunch of the ideas. I was always a person who had to sell the ideas to the management. We wanted
Sure.
to do something different. It was up to me to be like, this is what we're doing. And they'd be like, no, that takes more work for me. And it'd be like, this is what we're doing. This is what's right for snowboarding. And I would just fight tooth and nail to do what I thought was good for snowboarding. I probably wasn't an easy person to have as an employee because I was just really determined to do what was right in my mind for snowboarding based on my prior experience and mistakes I had made prior to that. So, we came up with theme issues. We had columns for guys like Peter Line and Todd Richards. And, then those were just based on influences from other magazines. I was always a magazine person. So Racer X was a motocross mag. I was into motocross, and they would have a column by a racer. And I was like, we should have columns by pro snowboarders. And so, that was something that we did. And, the buyer's guide as well. It's we used to go out and shoot the buyer's guide at the trade show. We'd literally go 10 miles a day back and forth, pulling boards and boots and bindings and photo shooting them in a photo studio. And then we came up with it. Well, basically, I came up with this idea to basically take the influence of the Japanese buyer's guides that were going on and apply it to America. And so it turned, and my boss once again was like, no, you can't do that. That's going to take way more work for me. And I was like, we're going to do it this way, or you can find someone else to do it. And there's the, not being agreeable part.
Sure.
So anyhow, it turned an $80,000 cost into a $400,000 a year gain. In fact, they still do that same buyer's guide to this day. They've made millions of dollars on a single idea. I put my job on the line to do, right? How crazy is that? But yeah, if you want product in the buyer's guide, that's the way it's done still. So.
Now, you were a snowboarder living in SoCal. It was kind of waning on you a little bit, right? Talk to me just a little bit about kind of the decision maybe to, I mean, it had to have been a hard decision at the same time to just say, like, leave Snowboarder Mag.
Yeah, I mean, it was a couple of factors really in that. So Bridges had a blown out knee and he wasn't getting it fixed. And so I basically put a carrot on a stick for him, which is like, Bridges, you get your knee fixed and you can like start really progressing your riding again. Because we grew up riding, competing against each other and all this stuff. And he was still riding, but not really like progressing, right? And so that was kind of in a holding pattern. And so I was like, you know, Bridges, if you get your knee fixed, I'll go find a job in the mountains because I don't like SoCal. I don't want to be here. And I'll go find a job in the mountains. So it took about a year and he got his knee fixed. You know, it was the right carrot on a stick, I suppose. And so I found a job in Sun Valley, Idaho, or Ketchum, Idaho, as the international marketing director for Scott. And that was a great job for me because, at least at first, because it like blended my two passions, which were motocross and snowboarding. Skiing I could tolerate, but you know, it just took my two passions and allowed me to kind of progress into a marketing role. And I became like the international marketing director, and I'd go to Switzerland like once a month. And you know, and then we started doing bikes, and I wasn't like a bike guy per se. And so, you know, it was cool to have like a Tour de France team riding your bikes or whatever as the marketing guy, but it's like it just wasn't my thing. So you know, at a certain point I decided to start Snowboard Magazine and get back into the snowboarding media.
Did you ever get to go to the Tour de France really quick?
No. I had actually no interest in the bike events. I mean, at that time I smoked cigarettes, right? And so like literally I'd go to these bike events and like I'd get up at like 6:30 in the morning for like an 8 call time, let's say, and I'd go smoke like 3 cigarettes in a row behind the dumpster. Then I'd jump in the shower, clean up, like not smell like smoke, do that until like 9 or 10 at night or whatever, till like the company dinner wrapped up, and then go sneak out to the dumpster and smoke 5 more cigarettes and go to bed, right? And like that was like I mean, I was addicted to nicotine, right? And so like that was something that was like, man, this is really interfering with my lifestyle, you know,
Sure.
and I wanted to be politically correct, and smelling like cigarettes at a big bike event actually doesn't cut it.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And so, so that was kind of one of the things, like the addiction to cigarettes was more powerful than the addiction to my job. Right. That tells you how, you know, how powerful they are, you know, and it's been hard to quit, but I have. So that's a good thing. Yeah.
So in turn, you decided then to, okay, I'm going to go and start Snowboard Magazine.
Yeah.
And talk to me just about the idea behind that, and maybe just the different model of how that came about and how you structured it. I guess it was different than most everywhere else.
Well, you know, being a marketing person, it was like I wanted to be. There's like 3 different like approaches in marketing. You can be the leader, the low cost provider, or differentiated. And so for me, it was like, we're going to be different on every level. And that doesn't mean just the content. That means the paper stock, the distribution method, the way we sell our ads will be different. Everything was to be different, right? And so it also was like the first family friendly magazine, as far as like we didn't print swear words, you know, and then we took a different focus on product. And that was kind of the editorial vision, was to integrate product a little bit more. And I remember this, you know, phone call I had. Some of the best business advice I actually ever got was from Ken Block when I was trying to sell him spreads in every issue, you know. And it's just like I put together the team, Draplin and Jeff Baker I had as the editor, and just put together a team of people who were trustworthy in the industry, known quantities, right? So we weren't just like kids in college making a zine. Sure. And you know, Ken Block, who started DC Shoes, is like, well, what's the mag about? And I gave him this, you know, it's going to be da 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 da, and I like went on for like 2 minutes about how radical and game changing it would be. And he was just like, that's great. Now say that in 5 words. And I was like, oh shit, let me get back to you. And he's like, okay. So I called him back 2 weeks later, and I was like, Snowboard Magazine, products, places, and personalities. He's like, sold. You know, and he bought spreads in every issue from then on. Yeah. It was like a big contract, and we got good advertising. You know, I mean, basically like went from like 0 to $1.3 million in sales in like a single year.
Wow.
You know, so it was like a runaway success because of that idea of being differentiated in every way. You know, the distribution model, we sent the magazines to free to shops, right, to support their culture and the culture of snowboarding at the grassroots level. So it was like, I'm not going to deal with your traditional return model where you have one person sitting there counting how many magazines got returned every month. Instead, you keep the magazines, give them away for free with someone who purchases something, or sell them for the cover price if someone wants to buy it, and you keep all the money. Right. And so I figured, you know, I'd sent 40 copies per magazine just to every shop in the country. And I figured Zumi's got actually more than that, way more. But I figured, hey, if you can't make 40 sales in a month, then what are you doing in business? So,
Right.
So anyhow, that was like the distribution model, and that was different, you know. And then Draplin had like a really clean take on design. We upgraded the paper stock. I mean, like a Snowboarder, it was always about like just getting away with the cheapest, thinnest paper that we could get away with. So I was like, let's go the opposite direction and make it on the nicest paper we can afford.
Sure.
Right. So that was a pretty crazy time, I would say.
Now, you guys weren't just sitting in a, you know, abandoned aircraft hangar.
No.
You guys were, where were you guys when you were doing this?
We were actually all over the country. Basically, Draplin was in Portland. Baker was in Seattle. I was in Sun Valley, or Ketchum still. And then we would come together. We'd all kind of do our separate parts. We had a sales guy in Southern California, Gary, and that was kind of the initial team. And so then we'd, you know, do our separate things and be on the phone every single day with everybody. And then we came together to put that magazine together, that first issue, at Draplin's house. And so we all kind of brought our pieces together and then put together that first issue. And then that was kind of our model, is like we'd go our separate ways and then gather, you know, in the fall for a week, a month. It took a week to lay it out or whatever. And then we'd all gather and put the magazine together.
Now, what was it? What was the first issue about? What was the big thing? You're I guess the splash into magazine. I guess.
You know, I think it was just like the fact that it was differentiated on every level, and I could like look someone straight in the eye and be like, not only is like it look better and it has like this authentic voice or whatever, but it covers products that you have, you know, and that you're trying to sell. And so like, because I was an editor and a salesperson, you know, it was like really about kind of breaking down this thing of like church and state, which I was always going to be authentic to snowboarding, but like the idea that the editorial and the advertising weren't related was something I threw out the window at that point in time, because it was like, well, we can do both. So like in our photo gallery, it's like we'd have captions that listed every product in the photo and the price of that product. So you could be like, oh, here's a shot of like Peter Line doing a jump, and he's on the Division 23 Peter Line, $4.99, and he's got 32 boots, da 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 da.
Right.
And so like it was just like this idea that like we could it wasn't selling out to me at all to do it that way. To me, it was just giving more information, a different kind of information to the actual consumers, you know.
Now, what was the reaction from the consumers? What was the reaction, I guess, from shops, that kind of stuff? Maybe in comparison to other magazines that they had, or
well, based on those sales that I talked about, I'd say
Right.
it was a hit immediately.
Right.
You know, and it was just different, and it was quality, and it just had a totally new voice compared to like Transworld and Snowboarder were so close in terms of design, in terms of content, in terms of direction, but this was something totally different, you know. And so I think that it immediately got its place. And then, you know, because of our distribution model, I was able to go sell ads at the trade show and be like, to any advertiser, just like ask any shop in the world what their favorite magazine is. And it was always our mag, because I was giving them magazines for free and they were selling them and keeping the money. Right. And so I think we put like about $1 million a year into retail, like $1 million a year directly into snowboard shops' pockets at that time. Wow. So, yeah, it was, I felt pretty good about that.
advertising free snowboarding media at patreon.com. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project.
Let me just shift a little bit. Let me ask you a little bit about your, I guess, career as an announcer, as someone that always kind of did events. Talk to me just a little bit about how you first got into it and maybe kind of some of those early years doing events.
Well, I became an announcer kind of by accident, I would say. I was at a event. I think this was even prior to working at Snowboarder. I was at an event, and the guy who was announcing the event was like the father of one of the kids. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, and Jimmy and Johnny, they like going out on Saturday night. And da-da-da-da. He was just telling these like personal stories that had nothing to do with the riding that was going on in the contest. Mm-hmm. And so basically I snatched the mic out of his hand and was like, that's a 540. That is a McTwist, right? And I just started calling tricks because they weren't, calling the tricks. And I was like a sponsored snowboarder at that time. And it was like, that was what was important to me, was just being able to call the tricks. And so I did that. And then I guess that went well enough that I got tapped on the shoulder by this guy, Jeremy Forrester, who was kind of coordinating the Grand Prix series. And then basically my second announcing gig was like announcing the Grand Prix series. And I've done it ever since. So about 20 years of announcing Grand Prix, just based on just being pissed off at this announcer, just not calling tricks or not knowing even what the tricks were, and so then I got to announce the Olympics. That was quite a rush. And now I've also gotten into doing TV stuff. I've done this at past Olympics. I worked for Eurosport and interviewed all the medalists right after they won their medals, which was really rewarding, at least as far as like I learned a lot. And I mean, you're interviewing people like right at the pinnacle of their lives. They're going to look back on that 30, 50 years from now and be like, that was the best day ever, and there I am like getting ready to ask them questions. I did that for like 60 different people. I did it for free skiing and snowboarding. And so, I've learned that free skiing and snowboarding are they have the same blood, sweat, and tears that go into both pursuits. And so to win a gold medal in free skiing or snowboarding takes the same kind of dedication and effort. So I have an appreciation for that for sure.
Did you get Esther Ledeca?
Oh, I did. I got a great interview with her. I'll actually post it behind our Patreon firewall.
As we should.
Yeah, because I'll have like little behind the scenes stuff, videos and stuff, but that I post behind the scenes. So people who actually donate to the podcast to make it happen will get unique content and things you wouldn't actually get as part of a free podcast. I'm also going to give away, like I have a whole ton of snowboard historical items that I'm sick of carting around. I threw the rear view mirror out the window a while ago and I'm sick of carting this stuff around.
So you're just going to give away everything that's in your apartment, just like slowly over time?
Oh, more than that's in my apartment. I mean, I'm probably about 100 boards I'm going to give away.
Wow.
And I'm just going to, and I have like a trophy from the U.S. Open and Danny Cass's original avalanche beak and all sorts of weird random stuff, that I've collected over the years and then carted around for 30 years. And it's like, you know what? I don't need to live in the past. I'm going to live in the future. And so, with Alaska, it's like I'm still progressing. I still have my Alaska thing going on. And so that to me is like the future. And so I'll just look forward instead of back.
Sure. Let's take it back just a little bit. Talk to me just about like in the announcing side of things. What have you found have been the real keys to being a successful announcer?
At first, it was just getting over the nervousness. Like, I mean, the first time you pick up a mic and you're sitting there and there's a crowd of people and you hear your voice kind of squeak through the speakers or whatever, and people like kind of crane their neck and turn around to see who's talking.
Right.
It's really, you feel like the spotlight really burning through you. And that was always, for years, that was like the hardest thing, was like the first minute of announcing. Every event, I would kind of dread that first minute, just like, and then it just got to the point where I was comfortable with it and I could just pick up the mic and talk, to an audience or a crowd or whatever, and then speak with confidence, and then beyond that have insights, and then beyond that not only have like unique insights, but also make those insights relatable to people who didn't necessarily understand what was happening as far as the tricks go, and trying to explain things at a more base level. And so, but it's always been this idea of progression, not just with like magazines, media, or snowboarding, but also with announcing. So I've tried to, develop tonality and the ability to build a story to a completion. And now I'm doing, I'm not even going to tell you what I do now, because I have this whole thing that I can now create a storyline that ties together from the beginning to the end of an event.
Sure.
Right. And so it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, whether they know the riders are doing it or not. Like, I can create that beginning, middle, and end just by announcing.
Sure.
So those are some of the things that I'm always trying to push forward,
Yeah. And you also do your homework. You go to the half pipe and you watch them all,
Yeah, that's like one of the most important things, is just studying and knowing what's going to happen before it happens, or having a good idea. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, if someone's going to crash or if someone's going to land that trick, or if they're even going to try the trick.
Sure.
But there's a narrative that you can build before the event even begins. And so now, these days anyway, I've gotten to the point where I'm taking notes and studying, and I'm writing intros for the beginning of the show and stuff like that, where it's like I'll really try to make a genuine effort to just make it a better experience for the people standing there watching, and not just calling tricks. I mean, I did that for years, like 15 years or 10 years of just calling trick, 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 trick. Wow, great run.
Right.
Or will that be enough? Will it be enough? It's like the story now is much deeper than that for announcing.
Sure. Yeah, it's difficult being up there, right? And like missing like a trick or announcing the wrong thing.
Yeah, and you know what? It's like, I've done that for years. I've announced wrong things, and I've been called out on it occasionally, but you can't really pay attention to everything that's going on at once. I mean, you got one set of eyes, you got a start list, and that's about it, and a microphone. And so, and your notes. And so, like, if you look down and then you forget if the rider is regular or goofy, and then they're going backwards across the flat bottom, not forwards, it's a different trick. And so you can call it wrong very easily just by like a simple lapse of concentration as far as those tricks go. And so, yeah, you're not going to always get it right. And it's how you own it. Or if you don't see something, I'll just try to say something that gives people a general appreciation for the effort that it takes to do something like that. Like, if I didn't see the trick, you'll see that I don't like try to call it or make it up or whatever. I'll try to give some people an appreciation of like how they departed the lip, where the tail came down at the landing, and how they built their speed for the next hit or whatever, And so when I get general, it's because I'm not like really focused in the detail of the trick.
It's hard, Have you ever been just like lambasted at the bottom of the hill by a snowboarder who thought, well, your calling of that trick really cost them something?
Not by riders. I mean, the thing is, when I first started announcing, I was like really raw, and probably one of my best learning experiences actually happened announcing a Grand Prix. It was probably my first year, it was probably my second year announcing Grand Prix. I was working at Snowboarder, and so I was just like feeling like I pretty much was on top of the world or whatever. I knew what I was talking about anyway. They validated it through giving me a job in the media. And this girl drops in. This was pretty early in the progression of women's riding, not like it is today, but this girl drops in and she double front side hits. Like that, meaning that she goes up. She doesn't even clear the lip, by the way. She goes up and does like a turn inside the transition, then goes and does like a toe side turn on the flat bottom. She doesn't even attempt backside. And then does another turn on the transition or whatever. And so I just tore her apart. I was like, oh, it cost your dad like, $150 for the entry fee and $200 for hotel rooms. And the cost of gas to get here was $200. And so what you're telling me is your dad just spent like $50 a second for you to compete in this event. And she broke down crying, right? I just tore her apart. And so my boss, who probably should have fired me at the time, but didn't, instead he goes, and I'll always respect him for this. He took me aside. He's like, hey, you see that girl over there? I was like, yeah, I see her. He's like, that's the girl you just announced. I was like, I know, I saw her. I announced it. And he was like, see what she's doing right now? And I'm like, take a good look. Oh, she's crying. He's like, how does that make you feel? And I was like, not very good, actually, right? And so then, from then on, I was able to kind of try to find positive in everyone's riding.
Sure.
Right? Even if they weren't riding well, I would find something positive to say about them. And, you know, sometimes you could tell the superficiality of the positiveness, right? I mean,
Right.
if I give you some really dumb compliment, it's probably because it's not that impressive, you know? But nowadays, it's like at the Grand Prix level, those riders all rip. No one's really like doesn't deserve to be there. But to me anyway, that girl didn't deserve to be in a quote unquote world-class competition. She should have cut her teeth in like a regional event first instead of trying to make the Olympic team with a bottom turn.
Sure.
You know, so anyhow, that was like a learning experience. So all along the way, I've had these learning experiences through snowboarding, and snowboarding has been that vehicle. And I guess that's the purpose of this podcast, really, is like to share some of the lessons learned through people's experiences in the sport. And so I've had a lot of experience. I thought I knew a lot about snowboarding, but really interviewing the different people that I've been interviewing has really been an eye-opening experience, as far as like they all have different perspectives and different experiences. And also, you know, talking to a sales manager or, you know, or like a guy who was there in the beginning of the sport. It's like they have different lessons. They've taken different things away from the sport of snowboarding, and yet it's all this one thing. And so, you know, to me, it's not just about what is marketable. Like if you buy an ad page, you're worth talking about in the magazine or something along those lines. To me, those aren't the stories that are actually the most compelling ones in the sport. So hopefully this podcast can kind of illuminate some of that stuff, and hopefully it's good enough that you're going to want to support it through our Patreon page, patreon.com/the Snowboard Project. Please support this effort. I'd love to continue doing this. I'm learning so much and enjoying sharing it with everyone.
Sully, I just want to ask you, like, let's talk about Alaska and why Alaska is important to you, and then maybe kind of the early days of Tailgate.
Okay, well, Alaska is the most important thing to me in snowboarding today, because when I first got there, it's like 1998, 99. It was basically like from the very first run, the best run I'd ever done by far, hands down. Nothing even came close. And every run got better and better from that very first run. And so it was like just mind melting, right? The quality of the powder, the open terrain, you know, and the challenge that you felt like, you know, it was always built up in those TV movies, like you could die, you know? And so it's like you have this fear, and then all of a sudden, as soon as you drop in, you know, it transforms to elation, you know, this incredible powder and whatever. And so the pendulum swing from fear to elation happens in Alaska like nowhere else for me. And so, you know, I went back to Alaska a number of times. I was the editor of Snowboarder at the time, so I could assign myself whatever stories I wanted to. So I happened to write the Alaska stories because I wanted to keep going back.
Sure.
And, you know, and then when I sold Snowboard Magazine, built that up and then sold it, I wanted to do something nice. I had some money, but it wasn't like, you know, the FU money that some people get when they sell a company. I just had like a little bit of money to throw around. So I was like, I'm going to go on the best snowboard vacation of my life. And so I went on a week-long heli trip with my buddy, who was like the DJ of like all the snowboarding events I was announcing, like the US Open. And I was sitting there at the US Open. I was like, hey, I'm going to go to Alaska. I sold the mag. I'm going to Alaska. He's like, I'd go. And I was like, perfect, that I won't go by myself. And I didn't think he was going to do it, but he ended up like calling me up a week later, like, okay, what's the deal with Alaska? Let's do this. So we ended up going to Alaska, and we spent like a week heliboarding at this place called ABA. And it's actually like in this where Tailgate started. And so it was basically like the whole scene in Alaska was about 20 people at that time. And this is like 08, 07, 08. And it was just the Mac Dog crew, a handful of French guys, and then me and my buddy. And we were like the only ones there who were like vacationing. The French guys were like making a movie.
Sure. Mac
Dog crew was like DCP and Jussi Oksanen and Andreas Wig. And those guys were filming the Mac Dog movie. And so we would just hang out in all the downtimes, right? And I'm driving back from that trip, and on the drive between Valdez and Anchorage, I was like, man, I got to figure out a way to share this with more people. And that's where Tailgate Alaska was born. And so really it was just this thing where it was like the idea of sharing Alaska with more people and promoting that ultimate experience. And, getting people to slay their own personal dragons of fear, to face your fear and overcome it. And I think everyone has that experience, whether you're a pro or whether you're a guy from the East Coast who's never ridden too much powder. It's like you can have that experience where you will face your fear. You don't have a choice. You're going to be scared. And you have to face that and overcome that to ride Alaska. And so to me, it's like this, anybody can go there and ride. First of all, it's only so challenging having the perfect conditions. You're not challenging yourself with difficult conditions. You're challenging yourself with perfect conditions, and the terrain is the challenge.
Sure.
And the mountains are as big, as challenging as you want them to be. And so you start at one level, and just every run you can step up a little bit more. And so that to me still happens. I still challenge myself every year. And, in the past decade, it's kind of transformed from helicopter access to snowmobile access, and that's just a natural progression with the technology of snowmobiles.
Sure.
And but man, every single year, I'm in my 40s now, I get better every year as a snowboarder. I never gave up on this dream of progression in snowboarding and in the rest of my life. And so snowboarding is or Alaska is where that happens still,
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to go with you on year number 1 when we just hopped in the van and we went up there. Kind of what were the, like you were saying, like only Mac Dog were there and a handful of small people. And I remember, a small handful of people. And then there were very like wealthy skiers, that's kind of what I remember being there.
Yeah. That was the year after.
The year after your thing.
The Mac Dog thing. Right. And that was the year after. But yeah, I mean, basically it would cost, I don't know, like more than $1,000 a day to go heli skiing. And so really not everyone can afford to go 5 or 7 or 10 days of heli skiing, And so the idea with Tailgate was to make like this a la carte menu of options where it could be affordable for people. So you can sled, you can skin, you can take the helicopter for a day. You can just try all these different experiences in the ultimate mountains and ultimate snow conditions. And that was kind of the idea.
Who were kind of the people that ended up showing up at these things? Were they the people that you intended to attract?
Well, I didn't know who I was just trying to share it with more people. And really my friend network, it was like the idea was to bring my friends and share those experiences with them that I had. At first there were a lot of pros who would come. And also my personal friends that I grew up riding with, people who had dedicated themselves to the sport. And then, it evolved to this thing just through marketing and putting it out there that it was basically a majority of recreational people, just average Joes from everywhere around the world. 25 countries we've had people from at Tailgate. And so, everything from like Croatia to a lot of Australians, Japanese, all over Europe, Scandinavia, and then like upstate New York City, we get people from the East Coast, from the Midwest, from the West Coast. We got a guy from Chicago, a couple guys from Chicago come. And so it's really, the idea is that anybody can ride those mountains. And it's like you see what they show in the movies is like the most challenging stuff, like the stuff that's like death defying, right? But the thing is, it's like 70% of the terrain is intermediate, so anyone can ride it. It's just like intermediate terrain with perfect conditions. You rode it. What was your experience riding in Alaska like?
I was scared to death on a number of different occasions. I think year 1, I'm the son of a pastor. I probably hadn't been to church in like 10 years, and I was like praying every time I got on the snowmobile that I wasn't going to die. But
you didn't.
I didn't, and there were definitely times where I was afraid, where we were hiking up to the top of kind of like saddles to shoot something, or, and different instances, but mostly it was really fun. Like I was perfectly fine, and I didn't think the actual terrain was all that challenging. But then again, I've been snowboarding like as long as I could remember, since
Right.
birth. So it's like it wasn't terribly hard, but yes, always exciting, always fun being there. There is always this level of like, I guess, being fearful of what might happen, and then I was always very happy when I would leave. And
Yeah.
I shouldn't say I was happy when I left. I was just happy to be in one piece when I left.
Right,
I guess.
right.
Because it kind of always held that like fear, I guess, for me.
Yeah.
So, but it was a great experience being at Tailgate. I think the people that you met in the parking lot and the people that you ended up in the car with, or taking a heli lap with, or doubling up with, all became really fast friends, and definitely people that I still keep in touch with.
Yeah.
To this day. So
and the thing is, it's like you're going to this like remote location, you're out there, and basically because everyone has to look out for everyone else's life, like, hey, if someone gets in an avalanche, you're the one with the beacon who's going to go find them, right, and probe and all that stuff. And so the idea is like basically you become instant friends, because it's like, hey, I'm looking out for your life, you're looking out for my life, so we might as well be friends, And so here's to that. And so, it's going to continue. And luckily, I made it through more than 10 years of tailgates, and it's going to continue. I'm not going to run it anymore because it's just like, honestly, it was probably a little bit too much stress to have 500 people who could all potentially, it's like the barrier to entry is like, you have to be willing to die doing what you love, right? And so to have 500 people on your watch every year, or close to that amount, and every year was different, but it's like, it's actually kind of stressful. And so I feel like this whole new lease on life, not having that stress. And also I have a lot of respect for Dustin James, who's running it now, a guy who basically slept on my couch for a year to learn all the ins and outs of Tailgate. And, it's a forced mentorship, but he's running it now, and it's in good hands. And so it'll continue. And so people will still be able to have that experience in Alaska, and really, the ultimate snowboarding experience for me.
Sure. So sleeping on your couch basically leads to great things. Like Bridges became the editor of Snowboarder, and
True.
Dustin took over Tailgate. So can I come sleep on your couch?
Yeah. I'm trying to live by myself these days. I'm trying to get that figured out.
Damn.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so Tailgate, that kind of thing. Now we're on to this,
Yeah.
And it's kind of like this new thing for you. Kind of where do you foresee this kind of going, and why this? Why now?
Well, I think that, just really, it's because the existing media isn't telling the story of snowboarding to me. It's not connecting with me anymore. I'm still a snowboarder, still define myself that way. It's just that the conventional media doesn't fill that need in me for knowledge about the sport. And so I really got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm just going to have to leave snowboarding and do something else. And then I came back across this idea of like, using snowboarding as a vehicle to improve your own life outside of snowboarding, and to have these experiences, and to really use it as like a tool of self-improvement. And then I was like, okay, that actually is something that I could, spend a lot of time doing, because there actually are some really interesting stories, and honestly, the more I dig into it, the more people I have to talk to, the more curiosity I have about what I didn't know about snowboarding. And so I think that there's basically an unlimited amount of people who've really, dedicated some of their passion to the sport. And so it's going to be told without advertising as an influence, by the way. It's like, that's one of the most important things to me. For the first time ever, I've created a new kind of media in that I'm not going to be looking over my shoulder to see what the advertisers thought of my last product, right? It's like, I don't care what you think. This is what I see snowboarding to be. You're welcome to make your own podcast if you disagree. I'm going to do this and put this story out there, and hopefully people like it.
Sure. So we're going to hear things. We're going to just really dive deep into the dirt and hear about, all kinds of, I guess, things.
Yeah, and nothing's off limits, really. That's
Sure.
the thing. It's like I've already done a bunch of interviews for this, and people talk about drug addiction with snowboarders, and they talk about the ups and downs, and and people who got passed over, and then also people who have had just this amazing success all the way across the boards with snowboarding. And so it kind of is this whole, I mean, snowboarding is like life. It's like there's ups, there's downs, there's unexpected turns, there's cliffs you didn't expect to encounter below you, and you have to land. And so, yeah, I mean, snowboarding to me is life, and so I'm trying to connect those dots.
All right. So, again, just let us know how do we support this kind of, I guess, open media that you are creating here?
Okay, so basically we're doing it through patreon.com/the Snowboard Project. You go there. There's like different levels that you can contribute to. Starting at, I believe the lowest level will be $2 a month, right? And that'll get you, that'll allow us to make 20 shows a month. 20 shows. This isn't like a once a week thing. I'm talking about 5 days a week. There's that many stories to tell.
So if we start out and there's like 8 people, like 5 shows only cost like $16.
No, it actually costs much more than that. I'm investing in this because I think it's a worthy endeavor, and honestly, it's like, yeah, I'm going into the hole to make this, but it's worth it because it's like, I haven't heard these stories. I'm progressing myself. And, and the thing is, it's like, okay, a dime a show, right? There's the barrier to entry to support it. But then there's all different levels, and then there'll also be a firewall. So if you do contribute, there will be unique content behind this firewall. And then I'm going to be giving away a bunch of snowboarding history stuff as well to those people who support on Patreon. So patreon.com/the Snowboard Project. You can find us also on Instagram, The Snowboard Project, Twitter, The Snowboard Project. We're going to have a Facebook page, The Snowboard Project. It's all kind of / The Snowboard Project. We kind of got a corner on all that. It's actually a domain I've owned for like 12 years, and it's just the right time to turn the key on it. So,
well, anything else we should leave the listening audience with, I guess, before we take off?
Well, we're going to start out with 3 shows a week, right? That's just to build our initial audience. Actually, we could do 5 shows right out of the gate, but it's like, if there's 5 people listening, do I want to spend all this money and all this effort on just cranking out these shows? So there will be 5 shows a week, Monday through Friday, and this will be all long form, unedited more or less, just to try to tell these whole stories instead of having this really well put together thing. Hopefully our audio is okay and it will improve. You'll hear some bad audio in some of the interviews. We're working on that, trust me. There's always room for improvement, but the idea is that we're going to tell the stories behind the stories, so get ready.
All right.
Strap in, get ready to drop it next.
Whoa, announcer.
Yeah, right. So anyhow, this will be a lot of fun though, and here's the thing: is I hope that everyone will learn something by this and maybe take a little piece of it to their own lives outside of the snow. All
right. Well, I'm excited to hear what we have next, and yeah, Sully, how do you want to end these things? What do we do?
Take action. Anyhow.
All right, signing off from the Snowboard Project.
Episode 1, right?
Episode 1.
Get ready. We're going to have a lot of episodes coming up here.
On behalf of Mark Sullivan and the Beav, thanks for listening to the Snowboard Project. Remember, ride fast, take chances, dream big, and take action. And for God's sake, don't be a pussy. Don't forget to support advertising-free snowboarding media at patreon.com. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project.
Hey folks, my name is Mark Sullivan and I am the host of the Snowboard Project, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about advertising-free snowboarding media. So I was involved for about 30 years with the traditional snowboard media, both print and also television, but every project I've worked on has had one thing in common, and that's advertising. And so the Snowboard Project is the first project I've actually worked on where we're not going to rely on advertising to tell us what makes good content. Instead, we're just going to tell the stories that come from the heart, the people who have dedicated a part of their lives to the sport of snowboarding. And you can support that
through patreon.com/the Snowboard Project. You donate on a monthly basis, $2 per month up to $100 per month. And that'll help keep the independent voice in snowboarding media alive and well. So go to patreon.com/the Snowboard Project and please support an independent voice in snowboarding media.